Hello, fellow warriors. Welcome to another episode of Divided, Survived, and Thriving, where we interview resilient individuals who have not only survived divorce, but have thrived and rewritten their own stories. And in many cases, help others do the same. I am Laila Aitken Ali, a divorce coach and the co-founder of Split FYI, an online divorce and resource management tool and community for anyone facing a relationship shift. Today's conversation is focused on parenting during divorce, covering co-parenting versus parallel parenting and ensuring your children's emotional and physical well-being are supported and supporting them through the divorce process. Our guest today is Dr. Karen Sethi Walker, a single parent and a board-certified pediatric intensivist turned divorce coach, who specializes in helping individuals navigate divorce with a child-centric, low-conflict approach. And as a certified divorce coach, she can guide you through the pre-divorce contemplation, actual divorce, and post-divorce reestablishment of life while prioritizing you and your child's needs. So important. Thank you for joining us today, Karen.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, I'm excited to have you here for many reasons, but I would love you to tell our audience, a little bit about your journey of being a single parent and pediatric to becoming a certified divorce coach. So what
Sure.
inspired you?
Sure. So I think, like so many of your listeners, obviously I went through a divorce, which is kind of the platform for me kind of moving into divorce coaching. But I had been practicing as a board certified pediatric intensivist. So I worked in the pediatric ICU, and I did that for many years. And kind of a very, very intense field, taking care of critically ill and dying kids. And I was really focused on work. And at the same time, my marriage was really suffering, for many reasons. And unfortunately, along the time of me deciding to kind of make a big change in my career, kind of got into the path of divorce. I have two kids. At the time, they were 3, almost 4, and 6. And so it was like my whole life got turned upside down, like so many of our viewers. And I was kind of navigating a big career change where I moved into industry outside of medicine. And then I was kind of figuring out how to, go through divorce and be the best mom I could be and try to take care of myself and do the work and then buy a house and do all the things. So I realized, I felt very alone. I was kind of the first person of all my friends to be divorced. And so I didn't have that community. I had a good friend a few good friends that I did, rely on. But I realized there were some things I just needed to hear. And if I had heard and known, it would have really made my journey a little different. So that kind of made me think about, like, how can I help others? Like, I'm kind of in the business of helping others. And I wanted to see, what opportunities there were. And so I learned a lot more about divorce coaching. And, I took a really low conflict approach to my divorce. So I wanted to kind of help people do that so that we can keep our kids, front and centered.
Love that. I very similar to you was in that position when I was going through my own divorce, and it was that position of, oh my God, everybody else is getting married or having kids, and I'm getting divorced, and I'm feeling really out of place and on my own and don't know where to go. And it was because of that I was heavily reliant on my legal counsel. And so with that, I realized it's like maybe too heavily, reliant. And it would have been nice to have someone like you, right, by my side to really help me through all the process and understand also, like, differentiate some of the emotions tied into the decision making, especially when it came around, child affairs, which is
Absolutely.
really, as you as a pediatrician understand, oh my God, there's way more of a, ongoing effect, right? Because we're so connected to our children, right?
Absolutely.
So I mean, there's so many questions I have, but I know one of the things that I really wanted to establish, and then we can talk about the other things. There's really this whole notion, and it comes up a lot in our community, is this parallel parenting and co-parenting, that versus one or the other. Um, in your opinion, let's dive a little bit about that, like the difference, and is one worse than the other, or can both work, or what have
Yeah.
you seen?
So there's three models of co-parenting, and I think they were developed by Dr. Mavis Hetherington. And so we talk about co-parenting. People kind of use this term like really broadly, but really it's not so broad. There's conflicted co-parenting, there's cooperative co-parenting, and then there's parallel co-parenting. And I think most of us exist in the world of parallel parenting. So what does that mean? You and your child's parent are both parenting kind of individually. You have two households, you have two sets of rules. You can communicate civilly, but you're not relying on the other for like parenting structure, or we don't have the same rules between houses. But you get along. You can make do for the kids, right? So a generally like civil way of being. And I think that's actually the bulk of most people who co-parent. And then there's kind of the conflicted co-parenting, which, we hear a lot about, which is mom and dad do not see eye to eye, or mom and mom, or dad and dad just don't see eye to eye. And so, the parents really put the well-being of their children first. And so that's really hard, because you can't co-parent because you're trying to put them first, but you're fighting all the time because you really can't get, on the same page. And so I think that's really hard because, at the end of the day, the goal is to support your kids, but it's backfiring because your kids are watching you fight all the time. So, they're putting down the parent, they're making nasty comments, they're undermining each other. And then there's cooperative co-parenting, which is like the dream. We all want to be cooperative, and we know it's so hard. This is really like the goal is we want to put the kids' well-being first, and we are going to put the kids' well-being first. It is really hard to attain. It is very hard to attain because that means that the parents have to be willing to talk about the kids' problems. They need to coordinate household rules, their child upbringing practices, adapting their schedules to fit their kids' needs. But if you can do it, it has great effects long-term. But it may not work for everybody. I think if you can't attain that because both parties have to be on the same page, then parallel co-parent. If the alternative is conflicted, just do it. Do what you got to do and communicate as needed, right? Because then your kids don't get influenced by all the negativity.
Right. And it's really essentially keeping them out of it. So
100%.
Yeah, very hard. I hear you. And it's interesting because a lot of people throw the word co-parenting out there, not really understanding all those different dynamics. And they think that it's a failure to parallel parent. Actually, it's, from what I'm hearing and what you're saying, it's actually not really. In the end of the day, it's a coping mechanism of kind of achieving the best outcome possible for your child, right? In the end of the day, without them getting involved or, feeling the heat of one or the other, right? And I have to say to you, like, I know so many couples who live together who are probably parallel parenting, because in the end of the day, they do not say eye to eye about how they parent, and it's hard. We come from different backgrounds. We come from a world of different cultures and backgrounds and upbringings. And it's really hard to see eye to eye, especially if you've been brought up one way and your partner's been brought up the other way, so and in stealth. So, the divorce just heightens and enlightens all of that to the nth degree. But
I think a lot of people have this, like, they have a really good goal, right? Like they want to do right for their kids, but because they're in such a bad place with each other, like they end up having the same dynamic they did when they were married, which is, not what you're trying to protect your kids from. So you have this great goal, but you can't do it. And I think the key here is having self and awareness, one, about who you are and where you are in your divorce journey. And then
Mhm.
also looking, and if you can do so in a way that's, not judgmental, and really just see like this person is or is not going to be able to do this with me. And then, you start the journey, but that doesn't mean you can't change, right? You can start from
No.
parallel and move to cooperative or vice versa. So
Mhm. Well, and it's I have a question about this because I know that for my own, in my own story, I know that it's very much a parallel parenting technique, but and it was conflicting in the beginning, very much so for many, many years. And my daughter's older now, and it's a little bit easier. But one shift that was made when she was about 9, because I was divorced from the divorcing as she was born. One shift that we did make was that we were just became more amicable in front of her. So we made the effort to be in the same place,
yep.
to celebrate her birthday together, and I can see that that shifted her. Not that she knew us together, really, she was different type of case, right? But her story of us, she was creating, and for her to be able to spend time with both of us. So this isn't about co-parenting, but at least we made that effort to do something together to make it feel like she's like, okay, they get along.
Yeah. And it's funny, I don't know if there is a term for that, but I think if you can put away the anger and really focus on like these special events, I think it's key. And even if you can't, like, right, if say you're a parallel co-parent or your conflicted co-parent, when your kid's coming off the field, standing next to each other, you don't need to talk, but have
No.
your kid being able to come back off the field and see both of you next to each other is pretty
Mhm.
powerful, instead of that poor child having to find mom and then find dad. And that just makes for a dynamic that no little kid should have to kind of handle. So like I think that's awesome that you did that, and your child is watching a great model of adult relationships, right? You may not get along, but you are civil, right?
Mhm.
And you can on a very superficial level be friends, right? Like you
Mhm.
can have this relationship, and
Mhm.
it's not deep, but it's there. And then also it just shows that you guys can, get beyond your anger and coexist. And I think those are such valuable lessons for our kids as they move into adulthood.
For sure. Oh my God. And with that, actually, what are some tips? I'm sure a lot of parents are curious, and we do have obviously that instinct, parental instinct inside of us, that we're like, okay, we know what's kind of best for our children, but how can we help them? What are some of the ways that we can help that emotional roller coaster that they're also facing, and not projecting our own, but recognizing that they have their individual one, and understanding that and supporting them the best way that we can. I mean, I know there's different stages in parenting, how you're connecting with your child at different ages, right? Because
Yeah.
toddlers are very different than teenagers, for example. But what are some tips or some ideas of how to support them best emotionally, especially?
Laila, you hit the nail on the head. It's like every child is at a different developmental stage in their life. So, you have to look at your child and see where they're at. So if they are a toddler or a preschooler, they're not going to be able to verbalize their stress
Mhm.
related to the divorce, but they may not eat as well, or they're not sleeping as well, or they're having sleep regressions, or they're having angry outbursts, or the normally relaxed child that is totally not the baby that you've known before. That's how they're manifesting it. So, looking at kids, when your kids are able to kind of um, have some verbalization, I think there's value in therapy. Honestly, probably from the age of 4 to adulthood. I mean, everybody needs to be in therapy. But particularly during this huge transition, number one, like you said, you don't want to project your own issues on your kids. And oftentimes as parents, we're going through our own emotional crisis, and it's very hard for us to be present and also assess and see how our kids are doing. So you can be proactive and put them into art therapy, play therapy, depending on how old they are, kind of get them with the mental health professional who can kind of tease out big topics. They're not like saying like, how do you feel with your dad's, mom's divorce, but they're like, draw me a picture of what your house looks like. And, they're looking at how kids are perceiving things and then having that, asking clarifying questions, and also normalizing it. And then as you get older, actually having them in conventional family therapy, whether it's, with their siblings or alone or all together, is really key. But I think, you really have to look, I think a lot of parents are like, my kids are doing great. They're actually fine. They like 2 houses. But, if you really sit down and ask the child, they may say, yeah, I'm fine, but now they're not doing as well in school, or they're more withdrawn with their friends. Teenagers, oftentimes, depending on what the relationship of their parents, if their parents are conflicting, they don't feel safe, right? So they go to school and they're going to fall in with the wrong kids because they're looking for somewhere to belong. The rates of depression, anxiety, suicide, substance abuse in adolescence is much higher in kids going through divorce. So making sure that we as parents, but also all the child health professionals who are interfacing with your kids, your teachers, their psychologists, recognizing for this adverse childhood experience and making sure we're giving them the support they need is really important.
Right. And not taking it for granted that they're okay, because every teenager would be like, I'm fine. And that word fine always triggers me anyway, because I'm like, something's up if you're just fine.
Absolutely. And, a lot of people are like, well, you're not going to force them into therapy. No, you're going to normalize that you are going through a rough time and you are taking care of yourself. And hopefully you are doing that, because that is so important, right? As a parent, it's very hard. And I think this applies to so many things, but it's very hard to serve others if you can't serve yourself, right? So you have to focus on you. You have to focus on your self-care, make sure you're eating, you're sleeping, doing all those things that are so hard to do when we're in the middle of a, emotional crisis. But when we're doing that, we're also processing our own feelings. So when our kids start having the difficult conversations with us, we're prepared to respond. That's the hard part when they ask you and they're old enough, why did you guys break up? And you haven't done the work. And all of a sudden you're like, maybe giving too much information, being at a place where you can have a conversation, not put blame on the other parent, state a fact and move on.
Completely, that not emotionally triggered. It's so true. I mean, it's interesting what you're saying, because as you were talking, I was thinking, oh my God. So my daughter was really young. So the therapy, I did put her into art therapy and play therapy. It was amazing and fantastic. And it really supported her through it, because again, I was the first out of my peers, but also equally hers. After she got a little bit older, then it started happening that, friends of hers, parents were starting to get divorced. But in the beginning, she was the only one in that environment.
Yeah.
And it really helped her through. And then the other end, it's my parents got divorced when I was a teenager. So, and I remember, I didn't have that luxury of, especially back in our day when I was getting, teenager, therapy wasn't really a thing. And
That was the thing.
it wasn't a thing at all. I mean, I remember the day that I found out my parents were divorcing, I literally broke up with my boyfriend at the time. And I was like, I don't believe in love. This sucks. And I really internalized a lot of things. And in the end, my mother really took it in a really hard way. And I remember I had to kind of look after her. So not only that, but I felt I didn't have that security blanket anymore. That's what was taken from me mostly. It wasn't about my parents just divorcing or the dynamic of parents, but what parents don't realize, it's a lot about it. A lot of it is the security or insecurities that they feel, right? That you're lacking as a child, no matter what age you're at. Even if you're a teenager, you need to feel secure, and your security blanket are your parents, right?
Absolutely. Safety.
Even if,
they want safety.
yeah, exactly. And even if they're divorcing, which is hard in itself, because the dynamic of, relationships are starting to go into your mind, and you're to understand them, especially if you're a little kid, but you still just want to feel safe. And that when that is ripped, so addressing that component, and I don't know what, and I'm sure that you can agree that I always say this to a lot of moms, especially because, we tend to overthink a lot of things about our child and we want
Yeah.
everything perfect for them. But I always say, I'm like, well, if you're happy, and to your point, if you're taking care of yourself and you feel secure within yourself, that's going to resonate and vibrate to your children. So they're going to feel better about the situation they're in. Ultimately, they might not like it. They might not like going to two homes. They might not like their parents not under one roof, for sure, but they still feel secure in knowing that their parents are there for them.
Yeah,
And
that's key.
right,
Yeah, I
right.
think, like the language you use is really important. It doesn't matter the age. You didn't do anything. We still love you. Our family might look differently, but we love you just the same. And yes, things are changing, but you did nothing. Like, it's not saying it once, it's not saying it twice. Like, they're also very insecure because they're not so emotionally mature. They're worried they did something, and they need to hear it over and over again. And I think, a mistake we make with teenagers is, especially in this day and age, everybody seems like they're older and more mature and they look it, but they're your kids, and um, to your point, like sometimes even as parents, when we have older children, we end up looking to them for support when really, like, they're going through their own, their parents are getting divorced, and they can't be that for us. So it is so hard, but it takes a great deal of self-awareness, and like really looking at like even the tone you're using around your kids. I found, even for me, like, I was sad and I would ask my kids, like, do you guys still love me? And then I'd be like, oh my God, Karen, why did you say that?
Yeah,
You're looking for emotional validation from your kids, but it's, we're struggling, they're struggling. It just takes so much awareness, and then you have to take it back and be like, well, I know you love me and I still love you. um
right.
but it is hard, it's so hard.
Because this is the thing, is that there's so many different meanings of love. And I think that's what I was questioning when I went through my parents' divorce. Was I was at that age of, I had a boyfriend, I was in love, and then all of a sudden, like, what is love? What the hell is love? Like, I had this idea of what relationship is supposed to be, and that just, to completely sideswiped me in that sense. And I questioned it. And my mother definitely didn't help me. I love her to death. I love her and I have such a great
Of course
relationship
you
with
do,
her.
yeah.
But at the time, like, she did not know how to support me on that, or make me realize that love isn't conditional to this, always conditional to this kind of nucleus, or this family, or the dynamic has to be this way, or blah blah blah. That was years in the learning that I had to have and do it on my own, which made it a lot harder. And it probably fed into a lot of my relationships moving forward, and probably even my divorce. So you see this and you see these patterns. And so with that, it's like, okay, so we know that it's really important to have, you know, watch or be cognizant of what you're saying around your kids, right? It's really important to not have them or put it on them to validate your feelings and your
Yeah,
emotions and
don't
your
do what I
role.
did.
Yeah, or your role as a parent.
Yeah.
Because now our insecurities are heightened. Look, I don't know about you, but I was like, oh my God, I mean, am I going to be a good parent? Am I a good parent? Am I a good person? Am I capable of being a mom? It's like all you question is that. And so obviously you're trying to look for the validation in your child to be like, am I a good person? Whereas actually what they only need like the security, the love, the compassion, the understanding, and that space, holding that space,
Yeah,
right?
that was exactly the words I was going to say. The key is having space and like
Mm.
allowing them, checking in with them, allowing them to say their feelings, validating their observations, because what they're doing is being able to, if they're able to verbalize something they've seen or feel, like, that is an important part of being an adult, right? And having a healthy adult relationship, being able to say, hey, this is not working for me, or hey, I noticed your interaction was not ideal. My kids sometimes will say, did you notice that, dad's voice changed when he was around you? Like, they're so perceptive. And I said,
Wow.
I did notice that. How does that make you feel? And it's like, oh, it doesn't make me feel that good. I said, yeah, sometimes it doesn't make me feel good, but I'm okay. And that's the other part I'm just going to pop into, is that your kids are also looking to you and they're worried, right? Because they know you're not okay. And I think it's okay to cry in front of them. It's not okay to lean on them, but it's okay to show emotion. But I will say that for me, particularly, even my own children, they exhibited a lot of stress and guilt when they would go to their dad's house, and their therapist found out it's because they thought I cried and stayed at home and just yearned for them all the time. And I realized, I thought I was doing this great job. I'm doing all these things that I'm telling you, but what I'm not doing is showing them that I'm okay. Like I'm supporting them, but I didn't show them that I am okay, that I'm exercising and that I have a life. And that, so, it is so, there's so many pieces to this, right? But showing them that, hey, I'm moving forward. I have a life, sharing what you're doing so that they also see, hey, mom or dad is really doing okay. I don't need to worry about them. I feel okay with the situation now, right? Like this is the progression of the divorce.
So that's so true. So on a funnier note, like, and around that same story, is that my daughter, who's 14, we moved to LA from London, UK, because that's where she was born. And we moved here when she was 10. And so about 4 years ago, and our life was different. I didn't go out as much. My life was in London. So I was kind of meeting new people and not going out as much. And she made that comment. She's like, "I'm worried about you, mom. You don't go out anymore."
They're so perceptive.
And it was so funny. She got so excited when I started like going at him. She's like, "I'm so happy for you." I was like, "Do you not want me around?" She's like, "No, mom. I'm just know that you like being social. You like going out." So even outside of the context of divorce or anything, they're super observant. They are worried about you. They do take that on. They really know you. So it's like really be cognizant of that. And love what you said. It's like, I didn't even realize I wasn't showing them I'm okay. And it takes something that simple. Be like, even sharing with them your plans when they're away, like, "Hey, I'm going here." Like, I'm gonna
Absolutely. It's exactly like, because what I would do it, I'd call them every night and I'd be like, "How's your day? What did you do?" And I was just genuinely interested in what they were doing, but never once had I shared what I had done. And so like literally their therapist is like, "Well, they said that they think that you cried all day." And I was like, "Oh my goodness." So, it is so key. And I think, they are so sensitive to who we are. Your daughter clearly knows who you are, right? And I think this experience that you just shared with me and I shared with you just shows that like your child is old enough to verbalize it. My kids probably needed some prodding to get to the point where they could express that. And I mean, that's happening. We didn't even think that this is happening, but this is, because of the fact that we're single moms, or we're, they're going through a divorce. And it just goes to show is that you need a team of people supporting you, but also supporting your kids, especially if you're keeping it about your kids. And the other thing is, don't do what I did and focus only on your kids, because that balance is key, right? Showing them a happy mommy, a balanced mommy, just another aside, I lost a ton of weight. The divorce diet is real. And my son said to me, my 8-year-old, he said, "Mom, did you notice how healthy you are now compared to when you lived with dad?" And I was like, yeah,
Wow.
but
Wow.
he knows now that like I'm taking care of myself. So it's amazing what they're picking up on.
I love that. I mean, very insightful also, by the way. Amazing. Kudos to you. But
They're good boys.
yeah. Well, so that's one of the questions I actually did have was around your doctors, people that you call on. Could you call on them a little bit more? And being a pediatrician, I'm sure that you've had people come to you like, "Oh, my kid is stressed out," or "We're going through a divorce," or "I don't know how he's." So how can you call on your doctor? I know we all know about therapists, but what about doctors? Because to your point, like kids, mind body connected, and sometimes they start getting sick all the time, or stomach aches. This comes up a lot in our community, that their kids are getting a lot of stomach aches and can't go to school. So
Well, actually, aches is sometimes how kids manifest anxiety. So that very well could be the case, and they're not eating as well. Two things to touch on. Number one, super hard to maneuver health problems when you guys are not together. And so when you guys are going through the divorce, having a very clear discussion about how you're going to approach health problems, even well child checks, dental checks, and things like that to keep our kids healthy. Who's going to be doing that? Are you going to split it? And how are you going to communicate about it? So that's number one. And then number two, to your point, remember, your pediatrician really only interfaces with you one time a year at your well child check, your physical. So, I did reach out to my pediatrician, who happens to be a friend of mine. And, she recommended, making sure that we had other people involved. So I went to the school psychologist. I had a meeting with her and I just said, hey, I don't know if you're going to see this at school, but I was hoping you could just check in on the boys. She said that they had these like school groups, which were about self-confidence or changes in families. And then they made sure to include my kids, I made sure there's teachers knew. I sat down with them and I said, hey, this is the situation. You don't need to give details. You just say, hey, they have 2 homes. So like even the little things of when you send home things, can you send home 2? Right? Because it's very hard. If you're in a conflicting co-parent relationship, that's another point of contact. If you have flashcards, can you send home 2? Things like that. And it actually really helped making sure that all correspondence included both of us was really big. What else? But obviously the therapist is not just the conventional marriage and family therapist. Like I said, play therapy, music therapy, and art therapy, all of those people can help you really talk to your kids. And I think the other thing is really keeping their routines the same. Actually, that is the best form of support, is their friends, their normal lives. So if you have teenagers, you want them to feel like, hey, nothing's changed for them. They'll talk about it if they want to, or they won't. But for the other kids, younger kids, you really want to have them like do the same things. If one of the things that I don't think parents always think about is when we split houses, having the same friends. Like if you move, still have the play dates with the people that they used to see. Right? Because like, that's such a huge change for them. So kind of keeping those familiar faces, like it doesn't have to be a health community. It needs to be a community of people who are looking after you and after your kids.
Yeah, that's really good advice, actually, and it's doable, and it can happen. And I know that we often hear, well, the other parent doesn't want anything to do with any of that, and that is understandable. That you might come up against that. It happens, right? But it's recognizing when you do have your children that you foster that, and you give them that. It's it's like some cases it's 50-50, some cases, they're all different percentages of when both parents are seeing the children, but whatever that percentage is during that time is to foster what you're saying about that kind of village that you create and consistency.
Yep. And, I think we spend a lot of time focusing on what the other person's not doing. I think it's natural, but really the only people we can control is ourselves. So if you can really shift your mentality to like, hey, what can I do today for my child, or what can I do for myself, and get to the point when they do something that's disappointing, or something you wouldn't do, you just let it go. I think for me, I struggled with the fact that like, oh, so-and-so is not doing it the way I would do it, but like, doesn't matter. Like for example, if they get an au pair and you don't, and they're only a 50% parent, like, are you going to judge them for that? Or are you going to be like, okay, well, that he recognizes or she recognizes she needs help and she's doing what she needs to do. Like, more kudos to you. We're all trying to do
Right.
the best we can, right? We're trying to survive and have our kids come first, and it's just not going to be the same, right? There's no one size fits all for everybody.
That's really brilliant that you just brought that up, because that is something that really is hard for parents, or certain parents, to really get their head around. Is, well, why does the other parent want the children if they're just going to put them with a nanny or somebody who's looking after them, where I could look after them? And it isn't just about the the other parent not hands-on. It's about being in that ecosystem, and however they're going to parent. If that means getting extra help, and that's just the way that parent is going to parent. And that's coming to grips with that is really, really tough.
Oh, yeah.
And oh yeah, and recognizing though, but when you're with them, you get to parent and do and show up the way that you get to, and probably have more energy in doing so because you're not doing it 24 hours, 7 days a week, around the clock, because no one's going to have that kind of energy when you're doing it.
Oh, yeah, because you want to show up and be your best self, right? And
Mhm.
we need time to recoup. And I think that, as you know, is a big thing for parents, is like, how am I not going to be with my kids 24 hours a day? Like, I understand, I felt exactly that way, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's going to suck in the
Mhm.
beginning. But when you get that time and you use it effectively, you exercise, you eat well, you go to therapy, you see your friends, you fall, or you stay at home and you become like a homebody for a little bit, and you reset and you do the things you need to do. Then when you get your kids back and you have them for this stretch 2 or 5 or whatever days you have, you're going to be like on and re-energized, and they
Mhm.
get the best version of you.
I agree, and totally true. And it is, in again, it is a rewiring of a mindset, right? It's a hard one, and there's no button to push, and I'm aware of that. But I love everything that you've been saying, because it really is a mind shift, and of looking at it in a different way. And beginning to not look at your ex as the public enemy number one, and all of those things that you thought of the reason why you're divorced. There always will be there, and in heightened in many ways. But it's kind of letting go of that and just saying, well, they're going to parent the way they do, and as long as my kid is not in danger and harm's way, you know they they're going to figure out things on their own. And I really, I can say that with a 14-year-old, that I watched her figure out things on her own. I mean, I stepped back. I did not She doesn't know any of those feelings, of those roller coaster rides of emotions that I had with everything in the divorce process. I think the worst thing I ever said about her dad was, he's not the best driver. And I
That's
remember this day, because it was the first day and the last day that I actually ever said anything that negative about her dad, because she got really upset. And I think she was like 9 years old or 10 years old. And we were talking about it. I was like, oh, yeah, your dad's not good. He's a really bad driver. And she got really upset. And I was like, ooh, wow, if you get upset for something like that, you can imagine the impact it would have on any child if you're really saying things that are. And funny enough, like fast forward 3 years, she's like, dad's the worst driver. So, but coming from her, it's okay. Fair play. Coming from her, she could say that. But it's an interesting thing that I'm watching, and then she's starting to recognize and realize certain things on her own, and that relationship. And what I say to a lot of parents with young kids is that, wow, it evolves. It really does. And they figure out things on their own. They are smart. I mean, I'm
Yeah,
sure
but
you saw plenty of smart kids coming in.
yeah, and I think the key really is, though, letting the child control the kind of relationship they're going to have with their parent,
Mm,
right? Like,
mhm.
you shouldn't have any influence on that. And, like, kudos to you for being so strong and really never bad mouthing. And I will say I'm actually in a very lucky situation, because I think that their co-parent doesn't say anything about me, and I don't, I try my best not to say anything as well. But not everybody's going to be in the same situation. And I
Mhm.
think one of the things that always comes up is, I get questions from parents like, well, what about if they were an abuser? Or what if they had substance abuse issues? Like, just to remember, like, this is not for everybody. Like, this is
Mm.
not always going to work, and you have to do what works for you. And that's kind of the big takeaway, is like, we are going to provide lots and lots of suggestions, or, anecdotes of what worked, but you have to find what works with you. This is your story.
Mhm.
No one else is going to influence it, except for
Mhm.
you. You can control that outcome.
And it's guiding your children, right? Like, the questions will start to come up, and it's being cognizant of everything that really you say will have an impact on how they formulate their story of their lives. And I realize that it's like, oh my God, then they start creating this story about themselves and you guys, and as parents and so forth. So I'm like, okay. So, but it does take just one parent to be that guiding light. And I say that all the time. I'm like, They need one good parent. If you have that other parent that's really tough and really hard, just remember they need that one good parent
That's all
that's
they
safe.
need.
It's safe, strong, there for them, providing that space, right? So
Absolutely. And kind of to your point, my 8-year-old said to me the other day, yeah, I know you and dad hate each other. That's why you got divorced. And I said, we don't hate each other. And then he was like, what do you mean? You guys don't talk? I'm like, yes, we do. We don't talk all the time. And then he said, well, then why'd you get divorced? And I was like, sometimes we're mommies and daddies are happier when we're apart. And it's the same tagline I've used pretty much consistently. But one thing he said to me was like, but I don't see you guys, talk a lot at games. I said, but do you ever see us talk badly about each other? And he said, no. I was like, do we fight? And he's like, no. And I was like, what do you think of that? He's like, okay, I understand. So, like sometimes you just got to state the obvious. They are building their own narrative. Exactly what you're saying.
totally. Well, as we know, therapy exists because parents exist. Okay, let's just face it. It's that cycle.
Yep, perpetual. We're trying to break the generational trauma.
Yeah, totally. Anyway, this has been a great conversation. Really insightful, honestly, and reassuring too, that even the pediatrician can, count her mistakes and say, I got it. I'm not going to do that again. So I know what I've learned and you're learning, and even, the fact that it really, your kids are going to be okay. They can be okay. If you're okay, they're going to be
100%. I agree. And remember, parenting, all those books that say perfect parenting, they're lies, because parenting is imperfect. It's trial and error. And, if you are making sure your kids are happy, loved, and safe, then you're doing a great job.
Yes. Here to that. Thank you. This has been great. I'm going to put where people can find you in the show notes, and how they can work with you. All of that will go into our show notes, because you would be a fantastic guiding light through a divorce and separation for any parents and anyone who's going through one. Not only by you, experiencing it firsthand, but your knowledge on, children's well-being as well is like gold dust. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.